When I returned home from my deployment after a year away, my mom hugged my brother first and said, "You're the only son who was here when we needed him." My dad added casually, "Your room is your sister's nursery now. Hope you don't mind." I dropped my bag, smiled, and handed them a folder. Their faces went white as they read the paperwork which named me the legal owner of the house. I, 29M, stood on the porch of the house I grew up in, duffel bag at my feet, desert sand still clinging to my boots. The flight back had been long, 14 hours of cramped seats and stale air, but I kept myself awake imagining this moment. A year deployed overseas does things to your mind. You replay memories on loop, polishing them until they shine brighter than they ever did in reality. I thought about Mom's cooking, Dad's terrible jokes, even my younger brother's annoying habit of borrowing my things without asking. The door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there, her hair grayer than I remembered, eyes widening as she took me in. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe recognition. But then she looked past me, down the driveway where my brother's car was pulling in. He'd been at the gym apparently, his usual Saturday routine. She stepped around me without a word. My brother got out of his car, gym bag slung over one shoulder, and Mom practically ran to him. She wrapped him in a tight embrace, the kind I'd been imagining receiving for months. I watched her bury her face in his shoulder, heard her muffled words clearly despite the distance. She told him he was the only son who was here when they needed him, the only one who mattered when things got tough. I stood there holding my duffel bag like an idiot, frozen on the porch of my childhood home, suddenly feeling like an unwelcome guest. My brother saw me over Mom's shoulder and had the decency to look uncomfortable. He patted her back awkwardly and mumbled something I couldn't hear. She finally released him, wiped her eyes, and only then seemed to remember I existed. She walked back toward me, her hug brief and mechanical, the kind you'd give a distant cousin at a funeral. She asked if I'd eaten, if the flight was okay, all the right words in completely the wrong tone. Dad emerged from inside, newspaper tucked under his arm, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked at me, nodded once, and mentioned casually, as if commenting on the weather, that my old room was my sister's nursery now. He hoped I didn't mind. They'd needed the space when she got pregnant and moved back home 6 months ago. The basement had a perfectly good pull-out couch if I planned to stay. The basement. The unfinished basement with concrete floors and that persistent musty smell, where we stored Christmas decorations and broken furniture we kept meaning to fix. Something cold settled in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I asked if we could talk inside. Mom said she had dinner to prepare, and my brother mentioned needing to shower. Dad shrugged and led me in anyway. The house looked different. New furniture in the living room, walls repainted in colors I didn't recognize. Photos on the mantel showed family gatherings I'd missed: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. My brother grinning beside Mom. My sister with her growing belly. Dad with his arm around all of them. I was absent from every single frame, erased like I'd never existed at all. I followed Dad to the kitchen and set my bag down carefully. From my jacket pocket, I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying since I landed. The papers inside were crisp, official, bearing the seal of the county clerk's office. I handed it to Dad with a smile that probably didn't reach my eyes. I told him I thought he should see this. Might clear some things up. He opened it, confused, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched the color drain from his face like someone had opened a valve. His mouth worked silently, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Mom appeared in the doorway, asking what was going on, why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He handed her the papers without speaking. Her hands trembled as she read. The deed to the house. The house they'd lived in for 32 years. The house where they'd raised 3 kids. The house they thought they owned free and clear. Except they didn't own it anymore. I did. The truth was actually pretty simple, though they'd apparently forgotten it entirely. 8 years ago, when I was 21 and fresh out of community college, they'd been drowning. Dad's business had collapsed, medical bills from Mom's surgery piled up, and the bank was 3 months away from foreclosure. They were going to lose everything. I'd just gotten a decent job, nothing spectacular, but steady income with good credit since I'd worked through high school and college, never missing a payment on my used car or student loans. I'd gone to them with a proposal. Let me buy the house. I'd take out a mortgage in my name. They'd pay me rent equal to the monthly payment, and when things stabilized, we'd transfer it back. It saved their credit, kept them from bankruptcy, gave them time to recover. They'd been so grateful then. Mom had cried. Dad had hugged me, called me their savior. We'd even put it in writing. A simple agreement that once they paid me back the down payment and closing costs, about $30,000, we'd start the transfer process. I paid that down payment with every penny I'd saved, money I'd been setting aside for my own future. The monthly mortgage was $2,100. They paid it on time for the first 18 months. Then Dad's new job stabilized. Mom went back to work, and suddenly the checks got sporadic. They were busy, they said. They'd catch up, they promised. By the time I enlisted 3 years later, they owed me $14,000 in missed payments. I'd been covering the shortfall from my own pocket, draining my savings again to protect their home. Before I deployed, I tried to discuss it. Dad had waved me off, said we were family, what was mine was theirs. Mom had gotten offended that I'd even bring up money. My brother, already the golden child, had called me selfish for worrying about finances when I was about to serve my country. Shouldn't that be honor enough? So I left, and while I was gone, while I was sleeping in a tent in 100-degree heat and wondering if every convoy might be my last, they'd apparently decided I was the problem. The absent son, the one who chose the military over family. My brother told everyone I'd abandoned them, that I didn't care about what happened at home. When my sister's husband left her pregnant and broke, my brother helped her move back in. When Dad's back went out and he needed surgery, my brother drove him to every appointment. When Mom's father died, my brother arranged the funeral. I was overseas through all of it, receiving brief emails that never quite explained how bad things were, never asked for anything, never mentioned they missed me at all. The emails I sent back were answered with one-line responses or not at all. Care packages I mailed arrived, I later discovered, but were shrugged off as obligatory guilt gifts. My brother had poisoned them against me so thoroughly that by the time I came home, I was already the villain in their story. The ungrateful son who took their money and ran away. Except I owned their house. That detail had apparently slipped their minds entirely. Mom's voice shook as she asked what this was, what I thought I was doing. I kept my tone level, almost friendly. I reminded her of the agreement. The loan. The missed payments that had now ballooned to $42,000 with the missed rent over the past year. I'd continued paying the mortgage from overseas every single month, protecting their home while they erased me from their lives. Dad's face went from white to red. He started to argue, saying I couldn't do this. This was their home. We had an agreement. I agreed. We did have an agreement. The one they'd broken. I pulled out another sheet from the folder, a photocopy of the contract we'd all signed, notarized and official. The one that stated clearly if they failed to uphold their end for more than 6 months, the house remained mine legally until the debt was satisfied. My brother appeared then, fresh from his shower, asking what all the shouting was about. Mom thrust the papers at him, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. He read, his face going through the same color changes as Dad's had. He looked at me like I was a stranger, asked what kind of person does this to their own family. I laughed. I actually laughed. The sound came out harder than I intended, sharp enough to make them all flinch. I asked him what kind of family treats their son like a ghost. What kind of parents give away their deployed soldier's room without even a phone call? What kind of brother spends a year convincing everyone that the person paying for the roof over their heads doesn't matter? The room went silent except for Mom's quiet sobbing. My sister emerged from upstairs, baby bump prominent under her t-shirt, asking what was happening. Dad told her to go back to her room. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and something like recognition crossed her face. She asked if I was really home, if I was okay. The genuine concern in her voice, the first kindness I'd received since walking through that door, nearly broke me. I told her I was fine. Tired, but fine. She bit her lip, glanced at the papers in my brother's hands, and quietly retreated upstairs. At least one person in this family still saw me as human. Dad found his voice again, demanded to know what I wanted. Money? Was that it? I could have asked, could have talked to them, didn't need to ambush them like this. I let that sink in for a moment, then asked when exactly I should have talked to them. When they stopped responding to my emails. When they didn't answer my calls. When they sent me a group text announcing my room was being converted and I was an afterthought worth a basement couch. Mom wiped her eyes and said they'd been hurt. I chose the military over them. I left when they needed me. Every word was something my brother had clearly planted, watered, and grown into a full garden of resentment. I could see his influence in every accusation. I explained, slowly and clearly, that I enlisted because I was broke, because I'd emptied my savings to protect their house, because the military offered stability, education benefits, a path forward when I had nothing left. I sent money home every month, not just for the mortgage, but extra for them to use. $200 a month for a year. That was $2,400 they'd spent while apparently hating me for sending it. My brother started to speak, probably to defend himself, but I cut him off. I told him I knew what he'd done. Mutual friends had kept me informed, sent me screenshots of his social media posts about being the only real son, the only one who cared. How he'd spun my deployment into abandonment, made himself the hero of a story where I was the villain. He'd wanted to be the golden child so badly he'd manufactured a narrative where I was worthless. He had the audacity to look offended. He claimed he'd been there. He'd done the work. He'd earned their respect. I hadn't been around. Actions mattered more than money. I nodded. Actions did matter. Like paying $42,000 to keep them housed. Like continuing to cover their mortgage while living in a tent. Like sending care packages that got shrugged off and money that got spent without acknowledgement. Those actions apparently didn't count. Dad tried a different approach, his voice softening. We could work this out, he said. We were family. This was just a misunderstanding. If I needed the money, they could set up a payment plan. I asked if he remembered the original payment plan, the one they'd abandoned. He flushed but pressed on. This was different. They hadn't understood. Things had been hard. Things had been hard. I almost laughed again. I'd watched friends die. I'd gone days without proper sleep. I'd lived with the constant possibility of not making it home. But sure, their lives had been hard because I wasn't there to fix everything while they badmouthed me to anyone who'd listen. I told them I didn't want their money. Not anymore. I wanted the house. My house, legally speaking. They had 30 days to make arrangements. I was within my rights according to our contract, and while I'd been willing to forget the debt and transfer the deed back if they'd just treated me like family, that offer died the moment Mom hugged my brother first and Dad relegated me to the basement. Mom's crying got louder, more desperate. She begged me to reconsider, said I was destroying the family. My brother accused me of being vindictive, of using the law to hurt people who loved me. Dad just stared at the papers, something broken in his expression. I picked up my duffel bag. I told them I'd be staying at a hotel. They could use the 30 days to figure things out. Find an apartment, talk to my sister about her situation, whatever they needed to do. But this house, the one I'd sacrificed everything to save, was mine. They'd made their choice about what kind of family we were. Now they'd live with the consequences. I walked toward the door. My sister called down from upstairs, asking where I was going, if I was leaving again. I looked up at her, saw actual worry on her face, and told her I'd call her. She wasn't part of this poison. She'd been dealing with her own crisis while everyone else was rewriting history. As I reached for the doorknob, Dad asked what I planned to do with the house. Sell it? Rent it? I turned back. I told him I was going to live in it. After my terminal leave ended, I'd be back, and this would be my home. The home I'd paid for. The home I protected. They were welcome to find somewhere else to poison with their selective memories and golden child favoritism. The hotel room was bland and quiet, nothing like the chaos I'd just left. I sat on the edge of the bed, duffel bag still unpacked, and felt the weight of the past year crash down on me. I'd imagined coming home so differently. Family dinner, laughter, stories about deployment that made the scary parts funny in hindsight. Instead, I discovered I'd been systematically erased, replaced by a narrative where I was the villain and my brother was the hero. My phone rang. My sister. I answered, and she asked if I was okay, if I meant what I said. Her voice was small, scared. I told her I meant every word. Then I asked if she'd known, if she'd been part of turning everyone against me. She was quiet for a long moment before admitting she'd believed what my brother told her at first. I was gone. He was there. It seemed logical that I'd chosen to leave. But she'd started noticing things, inconsistencies in his stories, the way he'd smirk when Mom complained about me not calling after he'd deleted my messages from the home phone log. She'd found evidence a few months ago, emails he'd archived, texts he'd intercepted. She'd confronted him, and he'd convinced her she was hormonal, that pregnancy was making her paranoid. But she'd never quite believed him after that. When I walked through that door today, she'd known something was wrong. The way everyone treated me, like I was an inconvenience instead of a son returning from war, made her sick. I asked why she didn't say anything. She started crying, said she was scared, broke, 7 months pregnant, and homeless without their support. I told her she could stay. When I moved back in, she'd have a room. The nursery they'd built, she could keep it. Her baby deserved a stable home, and I wouldn't punish her for our family's dysfunction. She sobbed harder, thanking me, apologizing, promising to help me prove what my brother had done. I told her to rest, take care of herself. We'd figure everything else out later. Update 1. The 30 days crawled by like months. I stayed in that hotel room, working odd jobs to keep busy, avoiding calls from my parents and brother. My sister kept me updated through texts. Mom was having panic attacks, Dad was barely speaking to anyone, and my brother was trying to organize some kind of intervention to make me see reason. Reason, as if gaslighting me for a year and erasing me from my own family was reasonable. My sister also sent me something else. Evidence. She'd been quietly collecting it since our call. Emails my brother had sent from my parents' account, deleting my responses before they could read them. Text messages he'd intercepted by adding himself to my mom's phone plan and cloning her number. Screenshots of group chats where he'd mocked me, convinced extended family I'd abandoned everyone, turned me into the family embarrassment. The worst was a video. My brother, drunk at a family gathering I'd missed, telling everyone that I'd only joined the military because I couldn't handle real life. That I was weak, selfish, looking for glory. My parents had sat there, laughing along. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all nodding like he'd revealed some profound truth. No one defended me. No one questioned his narrative. I watched that video 3 times before I had to stop. Each viewing felt like another layer of my old life being stripped away. These people weren't my family. They were strangers wearing familiar faces, performing a play where I was the villain they'd invented. 28 days in, my parents requested a meeting. Neutral ground, a coffee shop downtown. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. What could they possibly say that would matter now? They looked smaller somehow, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with age. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed. Dad's hands shook slightly as he stirred his coffee. They'd found an apartment, Dad said. 2 bedrooms, decent neighborhood. My sister would come with them until she figured things out. They'd be out before the deadline. I nodded. Good. Mom reached across the table like she might take my hand, then thought better of it. She said they'd been wrong. She'd been wrong. My brother had told them things, convinced them I didn't care, that my distance was rejection instead of duty. She believed him because it was easier than admitting her son was in danger and she couldn't protect him. The narrative where I'd abandoned them was less terrifying than the truth that I might not come back. It was a nice attempt at explanation, almost convincing, but it didn't account for the deleted messages, the intercepted emails, the active participation in my erasure. I asked if she remembered the video from the family gathering. Her face went pale. She asked how I knew about that. My sister, I explained. The only one who'd bothered to question the story they'd all bought so eagerly. Mom started to cry again, said she'd been drunk. It was a mistake. They'd all been joking around. I asked if it felt like a joke when she laughed at my brother calling me weak. When she nodded along as he painted me as a coward running from responsibility. Dad cleared his throat, said I had every right to be angry, but this was going too far. Taking their home, forcing them out, it was cruel. I was being just as bad as I claimed they'd been. I sat back, studied him carefully, and asked if he remembered our agreement. The one he'd signed. He nodded reluctantly. Did he remember the clause about what happened if they defaulted? Another nod. So I wasn't doing anything except enforcing the legal agreement he'd entered willingly. That wasn't cruelty. That was consequences. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Mom sobbed into her napkin, drawing looks from other customers. I stood up, told them I hoped the apartment worked out, and left them sitting there in the ruins of the family they'd destroyed. Update 2. I moved into the house on day 31. They'd cleared out their personal belongings, but left furniture, dishes, the basic necessities. A spite move maybe, or perhaps they genuinely couldn't afford to take everything. Either way, I walked through rooms that smelled like other people's lives and felt nothing but relief. My sister had moved into the apartment with them, but called me that first night. She asked if the offer still stood, if she could come back. Her baby was due in 6 weeks, and living with Mom's passive-aggressive comments and my brother's seething resentment was making her blood pressure spike. I told her to pack a bag. I'd come get her in the morning. She cried when she saw her old nursery still set up, every detail exactly as they'd left it. I'd added a few things, a new rocking chair, a dresser for baby clothes, blackout curtains. She hugged me, her belly pressed between us, and whispered that I was a better person than any of them deserved. I wasn't sure about that, but I was trying to be better than they'd made me feel. My brother showed up 3 days later, pounding on the door like he had any right to be there. I opened it, kept my body blocking the entrance. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing, stealing his pregnant sister away from her family. I pointed out that I was her family too, her brother, and unlike him, I wasn't making her stress levels worse. He called me a vindictive bastard, said I was just trying to hurt everyone because I couldn't handle not being the center of attention. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. I asked him if he'd practiced that projection or if it came naturally. His face went red, and for a second, I thought he might actually swing at me. Instead, he spat at my feet, called me a disgrace to the uniform I'd worn, and stormed off. My sister had been watching from the stairs. She looked sick, guilty. I told her this wasn't her fault. She didn't choose to be born into a dysfunctional family any more than I did. The baby came 5 weeks later, a healthy girl with my sister's eyes and a cry that could wake the dead. I drove her to the hospital, waited through 14 hours of labor, and was the first person besides medical staff to hold my niece. My sister, exhausted and overwhelmed, asked if I'd be the godfather. Not my brother, not our parents, me. I agreed, holding this tiny, perfect human and feeling something shift in my chest. Maybe family wasn't about blood. Maybe it was about who showed up when it mattered. My parents visited the hospital, but didn't stay long. The tension was suffocating, Mom's attempts at normalcy falling flat, Dad's silence speaking volumes. My brother didn't come at all, apparently too offended that he wasn't asked to be godfather. My sister didn't seem to care. She'd chosen her side, the side of honesty and accountability, and she wasn't looking back. 3 months after I moved in, a lawyer contacted me. My parents were considering legal action, claiming I'd coerced them into signing the original agreement under duress. I laughed until my sides hurt, then forwarded their lawyer every email, text, and contract I had. The notarized documents. The bank records showing I'd paid every penny I claimed. Screenshots of my brother's social media crusade against me. The evidence my sister had collected of his manipulation. Their lawyer called back 2 days later, said his clients were dropping the suit. He sounded embarrassed, apologized for wasting my time. I told him no apology necessary. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences, even if the lesson comes late. I still live in the house now. My sister and niece have the whole upstairs. I've made the main floor my space, and we've converted the basement into a playroom for when my niece gets older. It's not the family I imagined coming home to, but it's real, honest, built on choice instead of obligation. My parents send cards on holidays, awkward attempts at maintaining some connection. I don't respond. My brother tried to friend me on social media 6 months ago, probably curious about how I'm living in what he considered his inheritance. I blocked him. Some bridges don't deserve reconstruction. The house is mine, legally and morally. I sacrificed for it, bled for it in ways that had nothing to do with money. And every morning when I wake up here, in the home I fought to protect, I'm reminded that sometimes the family you build is better than the one you're born into. My niece is walking now, stumbling around the living room with my sister hovering nearby. She calls me uncle with perfect clarity, reaches for me when she's tired, trusts me completely. That trust feels like redemption, like proof that I'm not the person my parents and brother tried to make me believe I was. I'm not the abandoned son, the selfish soldier, the villain in someone else's story. I'm the person who kept his word, paid his debts, and stood his ground when it would have been easier to crumble. I'm the uncle who'll teach his niece that family means showing up, that love is action, not just words. And I'm the owner of this house, every nail and shingle earned through sacrifice they'll never understand. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it feels exactly right.